Hey, Mr. Spora here, biology class, and today we're going to be talking about more ecology, biological interactions. This is really what ecology is all about. We've been building up to it up to this point. Okay, so for this week, we'll have the video with the notes. I'll post the presentation. We'll have another sheet that you will fill out here, and this one has questions from the lecture on the first page and gets into it, and then on the last page has a worksheet that you basically fill this out, reviewing the three different types of symbiotic relationships, which we'll talk about. So there's parasitism, mutualism, or commensalism. You'll put who is benefited, who is harmed, or neutral, meaning neither, in this category here, and then you'll categorize it as one of these three options here. That'll become clearer after we do today's lecture. So do that for each of the examples that are in the table here, and then fill out the notes page on this side. On top of that, this week we also, again, have a video, 6-minute one on ecosystems, and then some video questions, which will be on a Google form, and you'll fill those out. No test this week, so just these two assignments, the video questions, and then the notes page with the worksheet on the back. Okay, I think that's about as clear as I can get there. Let's go ahead and get this party started. Okay, so we've talked about the different layers in an ecosystem, right? What an ecosystem is made of. It's made of individuals, groups of those individuals, all related, or populations, right, within a species. Different populations combine to make up golden crown sparrow, to make up communities, and then those communities, you add in the abiotic factors, right? The soil, the rocks, the sunlight, the amount of rain we get, the moisture, and then of course the temperature, that shapes the entire and forms the entire ecosystem. Ecosystems are based on producers, right? All living things need energy, so something has to produce that energy. And here on Earth, it is done by these guys right here, right? Plants mainly, and algae and other things. They take the sun's energy and they turn it into sugar glucose right there. And then things come along and eat that, consumers, and then you get your different levels in an ecosystem, your trophic levels, your food chains, and things like that. And then some consumers eat producers, those are herbivores, and then some consumers eat other consumers, on. And you run out of energy eventually because the energy is made right here. It's produced by the guys behind me, and then we consume it. And after so many transfers, only about 10% of that energy gets moved along at each level. 90% is used at each level by the things that are either producing or consuming. So you run out. You run out of energy. So abiotic factors, once again, are those non-living things, and then the biotic factors are the living things, and all of these combine again to give us our different, types of ecosystems that we find around the world. The difference between a desert and a tropical rainforest, of course, is probably be the amount of water that falls in it, and yet here we have a tropical rainforest, and over here we have a temperate rainforest, right? And the only difference there would be the temperature, right? Both receive a lot of rain, right? It rains a lot here. It rains a lot in the jungle, but it's a little cooler here. So we have different plants. We have different animals here as well. So the abiotic factors shape the biotic factors. Okay, there's our review. Boom. Done. Got an arrow on my forehead. Okay, so today what we're going to talk about are the biotic factors. And those are the interactions of the living parts. Those are how plants interact with each other, how plants and animals interact, and how animals interact with each other, and even microorganisms, how they come in and shape everything, those types of interactions. So again, abiotic factors, you can go to different planets and moons around our solar system and other solar systems and see these, in effect, they shape the landscape. But you have to add in those living things, right? Those living things, your producers and your consumers. Those two combine to give you an ecosystem there. Okay. So there are three different broad categories of biological interaction. There's predation, which is generally what we think of when we see nature shows, right? I'm going to kill and eat this thing. I'm going to consume and eat this. It's consumption. It's things killing and eating things. But then there's competition. Competition is a biological interaction where two things are going after a similar or the same resource, right? And they're trying to get at it, and only one's going to be the winner in that situation usually. And then there's a third level of biological interaction when living things interact, and that's called symbiosis. And we'll talk about that last. That is cooperation. Underneath each of these, so underneath predation, competition, and symbiosis, there are subcategories. There are types of symbiosis. There are types of competition, and there are types of predation. So your brain's going to have to get around this one, right? We're talking about biotic interactions. Beneath that, there are three kind of broad categories, and then beneath those, there are subtypes. So it'd be like a bullet point with a sub-bullet with another sub-bullet. So you got to kind of get your head around this as we go through this. Okay? So first one we're going to talk about in biotic interactions, how living things interact with each other, is going to be predation, consumerism. And this is when another living thing kills and eats another living thing. Generally, we think of this as carnivory, right? Carnivores killing and eating things, but there are many different types of this actually. Not many, but there's a few. The first one would be herbivory, if you eat only producers. So if I'm just going to reach down here and pull some of this grass out, and then I'm going to eat it, I am a predator still. I am murdering and killing this grass. I am consuming it. But since I'm eating a producer, it makes me an herbivore. So people don't often think about this, but vegetarians are still killing things. They're still killing and eating things. They're just killing and eating plants, which can't scream and are voiceless and helpless. Okay, if you eat only consumers, so I'm kind of higher up in those trophic levels, and I'm not eating producers, but I am eating consumers. I might be eating a consumer that eats a producer, but still, I'm higher up. I'm a carnivore. Carne for meat, meaning I'm eating some type of thing. Now, carnivores can also be things that eat insects, right? That's fine. You're still eating a consumer. It doesn't have to be that you eat a cow. Okay, if you eat both consumers and producers, like me over here. I am making a delicious breakfast gravy. This is in Alaska. I took this picture in a cabin. And I've got a sausage, but I'm also adding in things like flour and other plant parts to make this. That makes me an omnivore, or saporivore. Now, if I eat only dead things, right? I'm not really killing things, but I am consuming living things, consuming the dead parts of living things. Those are called decomposers or scavengers. It really depends on the size of them, but same concept, same concept. And decomposers can exist at a number of different trophic levels as well. So they kind of fit in a lot of different places on that energy pyramid. So those are the four types of predation. Again, predation is a type of biotic interaction. It's the most commonly kind of thought of one. Like when we watch nature shows, you're generally watching things chase things and hunt them down and all that kind of stuff. And they put adventurous music behind it. Dun, dun, dun. But they generally don't show that when a cow is eating grass. But it is still the same interaction. It is still the same interaction. So living things interact with each other in order to gain energy. And consumers interact with things to gain energy specifically. Plants don't really take part in predation. There are some types of it there that we could think of, like fly traps and other things like that. Some carnivorous plants, but they're actually just getting nutrients. They're not getting energy. They still get their energy from the sun. I digress. Oh, yes. And then decomposers. Eventually, they're going to come along and eat me. Wow. Wow, wow. Okay. Predation, competition, symbiosis. So we just talked about predation, and again, the most common one. But now we're going to talk about a couple others. The second type of or category of biotic interaction, when living things interact with each other, is competition. And this is an interaction between two organisms, either within the same species or in different species, in which, in essence, both are harmed. If I need to go and get a glass of water, and I have to fight someone to get it, I'm harmed, even if I win, right? I'm still using energy and calories that I would otherwise like to put into other things like growth or whatever in life, and I have to spend them on just trying to get something along the way. So usually what causes competition is a limited supply of at least one resource in their environment. And again, food, water, mates, territory, whatever. And that is needed and required by both things, that are going after it. So in the case of some of these photos here, here's a little mole crab on the beach, and these are two shorebird sanderlings, and they both want to eat it. So there's competition within this species to get at that. This one is karate kicking that one in the head. Wacha! Okay. These two red kangaroos are competing over something, maybe mates, maybe food and territory. And here, these birds are competing with this squirrel. They're not trying to eat the squirrel's brains. They're just trying to get at whatever the squirrel is eating. It's seeds or something like that. So they're both competing for the squirrel's nuts. Over here, you've got light. And so in plant communities, we've got to remember that it's not just animals this is happening with. It's happening with all living things, and plants are a huge chunk of that. More numerous than animals here on Earth. They're probably competing in this photo. The main thing I would point out would be the light. There's light competition, especially for the smaller plants growing. Um, so within species and then between species as well there. Two types of competition. We can classify competition into two categories. Intra-specific competition means within a specific population. Okay, so competition between individual organisms of the same species. So we've got all these murres here. These are seabirds. And this is a photo I took in Alaska on Chauwiat Island near the Aleutians. And seabirds have a huge amount of area to feed. They have the ocean. But when it comes to nesting and laying eggs, there's very little habitat that is safe for them. These small islands with these rock ledges, because they don't have many defenses against land predators, so they need to be on land but away from predators. So they choose these rock ledges. And they really have to crowd in there. So every one of these birds that you see here is on an egg. So the competition in this case is determined by a resource that is limiting. Whatever is limited in their environment is probably what they're going to compete over, because everything else is abundant. Everything else, they have food, they have enough space to fly around, etc., water and all that. And if they didn't need to breed, they would just spread out over the whole ocean, and it could accommodate probably more birds than there actually are. But because of the limited areas to breed, they all have to crowd into this one area. And this kind of determines how large this population of birds can be, right? If the birds might be excluded from here or might not be as successful because they're on the edges where their eggs get knocked off. That's going to limit the population size. This population might be able to keep growing if they had more nesting area. This is a picture of some least auklets up in Alaska that I took on the Pribilof Islands. And these birds show up similar to the murres. They crowd in, and right here it's a bunch of birds singing, and they're competing for mates in this case. The other type of competition, so there's intra-specific back here within a population. Intra is within. Inter is without, meaning between different populations of living things. So this is competition between unrelated organisms for a particular resource, right? In this case again, right, these starlings are going after the squirrel's seeds that the squirrel is eating, and they're competing for them. When I think of trying to remember these two, like intra versus inter, I generally think of inter meaning like an international flight. So I would be flying to another country, to another population. So one way to remember that, international, between different countries or nations. So usually in the case of interspecific competition, one species usually pushes out the other. There's usually a winner in this one, and it'll exclude the other species from whatever resource that is being their primary resource, or even exclude it completely from the environment. You generally don't have overlapping species that feed on the exact same things in the exact same way, the exact same time, in the same ecosystem. Coyotes and bobcats, although both carnivores, have different feeding strategies, and some of their food may overlap, but not all of it. And they may get at that at different ways or at different times of the day. So usually this causes an ecosystem to get kind of divided up into different habitats and what we call niches, which we'll talk about next week. Or it drives one species to either be extinct or evolve slightly different strategies over time in that population. So this can also be a driving force of evolution. Okay, so two types of competition now. Intraspecific, within a population like you see here, or interspecific, right, between two different populations. So the zebras and the gazelles in this case are competing for access to water. So what's the difference between these two pictures? These are all one species. This is two different species. Population, community. So intraspecific happens within a population. Interspecific happens between populations or within a community. Boom. Review. Intra, inter. Let's play a little game here, kids. Intraspecific or interspecific competition? 1, 2, 3, you tell me. Inter, two different species. One more here. Intra or interspecific competition? 1, 2, 3, you tell me. Intra, same species. And then you think about what they could be competing over. In this case, it could be food, it could be mates. Who knows? Intra or inter. And again, intra, it's within a population, same species. And again, intraspecific competition will limit the size of the population. So there can't be an unlimited number of deer. They're probably competing for access to mates right here. So the dominant one is going to be the one that gets at them. Now, if there was an unlimited number of mates, they might not compete, but there is a limit to that. Okay, here's another kind of cool one that, again, we forget to think about plants. This is Eastern Oregon. This is pretty much what Central and Eastern Oregon looks like for hundreds, thousands of square miles. And intra or interspecific competition. Think about it for a second. Think about what they would be competing over. And in Eastern Oregon, sky is wide open and get a lot of light. The soil's not too bad. It's usually volcanic in origin. And the temperature, usually conducive to plant growth. It can get pretty cold in the winter, but it's not sub-zero. And in the summer, it gets, pretty warm, but it's not, not Death Valley. So out here, the main limiting factor would be light. Or not light, excuse me, water. Competition for water is pretty intense over here. It is a desert, considered a desert. Rainfall can be anywhere between like 8 inches to maybe 15 inches max a year, versus we get 100 inches a year here. So a lot less rain, and so plants have to compete for water over here, and they're pretty evenly spaced. If you were to look down on this, it looks like a quilt. This is big sagebrush, and this is a great example of intraspecific competition for water. In our area, I mentioned this at the beginning, competition is mainly not for water, because we have an abundance of that. The temperature is great. Soil is good as well here. The main competition is for light. Everything else grows so abundantly because there is so much water and the soil is good, and the temperature year-round is pretty moderate. That's why it's called a temperate rainforest. But sunlight becomes then the limiting factor because everything grows up so thick and heavy that light down on the forest floor can be pretty dark down there, so light is limited. And that causes competition. In this one here, you could say intra and inter because there's multiple different species. There's competition all across the board. Whatcha? I'm going to kick you in the head. Intra or inter. In this case, intra within a species. Okay, last one, intra or inter. What do you think? If you said either of those, you're wrong. This is not competition. What is this? This is, I think this is an African kestrel, and this is some type of African bee eater. This bird has murdered and is eating this bird. So therefore, this is not competition, it's predation, right? This bird is a predator of this bird. It is consuming it. It's not competing with it. So that is a different type of biotic interaction. Trick question. Gotcha. So remember, there's predation, and then there's competition so far. Two different things. Predation is I'm going to consume and eat you. And competition is we're both going after something that we want to consume and eat. So the sanderling is preying on this mole crab, but the interaction between these two is competition. The interaction between these two is predation, predator and prey. Okay, so we've covered predation and competition now. And now we want to get into a more interesting one, I think. And that's some type of cooperation, actually. It's called symbiosis. So symbiosis as a broad category, is defined as a close relationship where two species are interacting and at least one benefits, right? So far, no one really benefits. No one benefits from competition. You may think you do because you're the winner. Yeah, but you still had to compete and you still lost calories, maybe skin in the process, right? Be better for you just to go and get that mole crab or eat those seeds or find that mate without having to fight someone for it along the way. So both are negative in competition. In predation, of course, right, someone loses, right? Um, and I guess in the sense there's someone wins. But in this one, right, at least one benefits and one relies on the other, but no one is consumed or killed in this type of interaction. This is done for benefit. So there are three different types of symbiosis. Um, and the first type that we're going to talk about is probably the most common one that people think of, and it's mutualism. This is where both species benefit. And the way that I tend to think of symbiosis is thinking about it in a little symbolic fashion. Plus plus. That's the way I say it. Mutualism is plus plus. Both species benefit from this interaction. A cool one, an interesting one, is this African plover. I believe it's a Nile plover, if I'm correct. It's a type of shorebird, actually. And then this, of course, is an African crocodile, I believe, not an alligator, I'm not sure. And the bird goes inside the mouth, and the crocodile leaves its mouth wide open. And then the bird is eating little, chunks of leftover food and parasites and other things from inside the alligator's mouth. So alligator gets a dental cleaning on the daily, and the bird gets food. Alligator does not eat the bird. Both win and benefit from this one. Oh, Nile crocodile and Egyptian plover. I have it right here. Okay, above in this image here, this is one of our local examples here on the Oregon coast. We have the green surf anemone, Anthopleura xanthogrammica, and this is an animal. This is an Cnidarian. It's related to jellyfish and corals. And inside this animal, which has stinging tentacles and cells and a mouth right here, inside the tissue of this animal lives an algae, which is a whole different type of organism, right? Basically, a protist, a photosynthetic producer. And so you got a heterotroph and an autotroph living together in harmony. What does the anemone get? The anemone gets a homemade supply of glucose being pumped into its body on the daily by this algae. And the algae gets a protective home where things like slugs or snails or urchins aren't going to come along and eat it and graze it. So win-win. Plus plus. Okay, next one. Commensalism. So commensalism is this. Commensalism is one species benefits, and the other species really doesn't even know. Not bothered. Don't care. So instead of plus plus, think of this one as a plus zero, right? One benefits, other isn't bothered. A bird nest in a tree is a pretty classic example. Now the bird may end up eating parasites or other, insects that harm the tree, so that could be mutual. But most of the time you think of this as just the bird is building a little tiny nest there, weighs nothing to the tree, and the tree doesn't even care. Commensal. Another type of commensal relationship are these little remoras, the sucker fish that tend to cling on to sharks and hitch a ride. These aren't cleaner fish. They're not cleaning the shark. They're not cleaning it of parasites. They are just hitchhiking. And as the shark feeds and bites off chunks of bigger things, little bitty chunks go flying by and the remoras swim out and grab them and feed. So they are hitchhiking and just basically living off the scraps of the shark. That's a good example of what we would call a commensal relationship or commensalism. Okay, last one here on our hit parade of symbiosis. Again, symbiosis is where two species are basically working together and one benefits. Now this one is really, you wouldn't think of this as symbiosis, but it's not predation. It's parasitism. And in parasitism, one species benefits, and the other is harmed, but it's not killed or consumed, right? The species that's benefiting needs the other one to stay alive and stick around because it's its host, basically. So this one is a plus minus. Right? We started at the top, plus plus, went down a little bit, plus zero. Now we're at the bottom, baby. Plus Minus. Okay, so one is winning and one is kind of losing, but not losing the ultimate battle. It's not losing its life. Around here, mosquitoes in the summertime are a prime example of that. They depend on other organisms like us for food, blood, and again, it's not predation because they're not killing us. Now, roundworms are another type of parasite. Dogs get these pretty commonly around here, and you can read my caption on what I think about all that. But they transfer it in their poo. If you ever seen a dog dookie full of worms, it is disgusting. And the most amazing thing is that other dogs don't find it disgusting. They find it delicious, and they eat it, and then they get the worms. True story. Other countries in the world, other places in the world, parasites are a lot bigger problem. You know, we benefit here from having clean water. Number one, we have water treatment, so we have sewers, things like that that take our waste away. We have trash that gets picked up, so it doesn't sit out and get flies on it and things like this. So other places in the world that don't have all of the infrastructure that we are fortunate enough to have. Um, End up with more parasites, or people end up walking around outside farming barefoot, and there's other worms that can hookworms and things that can get in as well. Not so bougie. Okay, I just put a slide up here of Precious, my ceramic cat, because her eyes are haunting and kind of creepy. I hope you enjoyed your tour today of the three different types of biotic interactions, the ways that living things interact with each other, right? So just to wrap it up and summarize again, the first one is predation, killing and eating something. Okay, that's a textbook type of biotic interaction. Living things interacting with each other in order to get energy. Consumers or heterotrophs are the ones that do this. Plants really don't take part in the predation side of things because they're autotrophs. They get their energy from the sun. The other type of biotic interaction would be competition. Two things, two organisms, right, competing for a particular resource. Now, this could be two organisms in a species, and that would be intraspecific, right, because they would be within a population. There could be two organisms from two different species interacting, right, or two populations interacting at the community level. That's interspecific competition. Usually one gets pushed out in that instance. In intraspecific, within a population, that competition usually limits the size of the population, sort of is the capper that determines how many things can exist in that group. That can be competition for water. Think of a herd of elk competing for, just grass to graze on. There's only so much that can sustain that population, so they're going to compete over feeding space. For salmon, that could very well be gravel beds that are suitable for them to nest in, right? The type of gravel, the velocity of the stream water, etc. So there's going to be competition for that, right? And so that's going to limit how many salmon can fit into a watershed system. So that's competition. The last type of biotic interaction after predation and competition is symbiosis. Things working together-ish. Mutualism, things definitely work together. Both species benefit. So that biotic interaction kind of boosts up the population of those two different organisms, two different species. Commensalism, one benefits, one isn't bothered. Right behind me here is a huge group of willow trees, and you can hear all kinds of bird song going on in there. Lots of birds right now nesting. The trees really aren't bothered. The birds probably pull off some parasites and things that help the trees, but trees are doing their own thing and the birds are benefiting from that. We call that commensal. The last one, parasitism. One species steals from another and benefits but isn't killing it. Those are the three kind of broad categories and subcategories of how living things interact. Think about this. In your own day-to-day life. Think about this when you look at your cat. Think about this when you think about farming or cows or growing crops or gardening and pulling weeds or any of the biotic interactions in your world. What is the relationship? Is it competition? Is it predation? Is it some type of symbiosis, right? You and your pet, that's a symbiotic relationship. Um, versus a raccoon digging through your trash, that might be a parasitic or commensal relationship. There's a lot of different types, ways to look at these things out there, but we're all living things, and all living things are governed by the laws of nature. And so whatever applies, to the natural world and an ocean ecosystem also applies to a land ecosystem as far as those basic laws of interaction also applies to our own lives and how we interact with each other, and with the world around us as well. And of course, in this day and age, thinking about the coronavirus, right? Think about competition for resources there. Think about parasitism. Think about predation. All of those things play into how we're having to adjust and deal with that as well. So, pretty fascinating stuff. Pretty applicable to our lives. Um, Fill out the notes page, right? Fill out the notes from this. And then on this back page here, you're going to identify which type of biotic interaction it is. So an example would be mycorrhizae, that's how you say that, are associations between a fungus and the root of a plant. The fungi provides minerals to the plant, and the plant provides food to the fungus. Right behind me here, actually, back in there, are some alder trees, right over there by the spruce. Alder trees have fungus in their roots, and the fungus um, in the roots pull out certain minerals from the soil around it the plant normally couldn't get, and then feed it to the tree. The tree, in turn, feeds the fungus glucose. So that is a symbiotic relationship. So, and it is specifically a mutual relationship. The fungus benefits, the fungus is a plus, and then the plant is a plus. So both are pluses in that one. So you would write plant plus, fungus plus, and then over here, you would write mutualism. Do the same for each of these down in here, identifying which two we're talking about. In this case, it's egrets and cows, cattle egrets and cows, which we have around here, both. So I tried to find examples that are relevant to where we are, but I also threw in a few others or borrowed a few others from wherever I got that table from in the first place. Okay, fill that out, turn that in, watch the video. All of this will be posted in Google Classroom. Have a great week, everybody. Miss seeing you all in class. And just email me if you have any questions. Show up at the class meetings on Wednesday and on Friday as well, because it's super helpful if you show up to those and ask questions after we've gone over this. I can help you with this worksheet that we have posted and other things. And all of this will be due on Friday. Take care. Toodles.